Did the Jets make the decision to go to Mike White weeks before any of us realized it? Is Mike LaFleur too pass happy? How do we fix the Jets' red zone problems? We'll discuss all of this and more on today's mailbag edition of the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, December 7th, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com, thanking you for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. This podcast is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit the subscribe button where you are watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you're listening on a podcast source, please give the show a 5-star review. It helps the channel out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. So does giving this episode a big thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Well, today's Wednesday, and we have our weekly mailbag show. Thanks to everybody who sent in questions, and we will begin with our first listener question, and it's about Mike White, not surprisingly. John, a number of weeks ago, in an under-the-radar move, the Jets promoted Mike White from third string to second string. With the benefit of hindsight, do you think the coaches were seeing things from Zach Wilson in practice that concerned them and caused them to make the move quietly? In short, were the coaches quietly preparing for the possibility of a quarterback switch by promoting Mike White to the backup? Well, I think that maybe they were less happy with Zach Wilson than they let on because, to me, I don't think you make the change based on one game. So the fact that Jets changed quarterbacks after the New England game tells me that they had a lot of doubts about Zach Wilson's play. And when I go back and I read some Robert Saleh press conference transcripts, even after the Denver game, he was not super complimentary of Zach Wilson. He even made a comment to the effect of, Zach's got to play better, which was true. Zach, during that winning streak, was very up and down. You know, he began it with an excellent game against Pittsburgh where he led the Jets back from that 10-point fourth quarter deficit. The next week against Miami, I thought he was okay. I thought he missed some throws, though. You know, all in all, I think it was a pretty good game. Then you follow that up. I mean, there were 3 bad games in a row. Green Bay, he was not good. Denver, he was not good. And New England, the game that they lost, you know, it was ugly. He threw 3 interceptions. And that was really the first game in that stretch since Pittsburgh where it was on Zach Wilson's shoulders and he did not respond. And, you know, the Jets, during that 4-game winning streak, they won about half of their games despite Zach Wilson. And they followed that up with a solid performance against Buffalo. But it wasn't a spectacular game. I mean, you know, he threw for like 150 yards against the Bills when the Jets won that game. And on the game-winning drive, they barely threw the ball. That was all based on the run game, the drive that won them the game. So when I look back on this, I do think maybe the Jets, despite what they were saying at the time, because I really did not think there was any chance they were going to bench Zach Wilson this season. I thought that they were just going to live with it, and if the team won, then they'd be happy with it. And if they lost, then, you know, it would stink, but they were just going to roll with their young quarterback. So to me, it says that they maybe were thinking about making a quarterback change at some point. Now, was this the reason for the Mike White promotion? You know, I don't know, because, well, if they weren't happy with Zach Wilson and they thought Flacco was better, they would have just put Flacco in. I think something happened with Mike White, because to me, Mike White looks better than he looked in preseason. He looks even better than he did last year. So I think it's possible Mike White just really impressed them in practice. Because you don't need to promote Mike White in order to pull Zach Wilson. You could have just put Joe Flacco back in, as frustrating as that would be, as irritated as I think we'd all be if that happened. So I don't know that the two are necessarily related. I do feel like maybe the Jets were kind of thinking about a move, but I think the White promotion to backup, and it was a kind of a subtle thing, and I will say that there were some people who speculated at the time. I did not believe it myself. There were some people who thought and said at the time the Jets made the move, maybe there's something going on here. So it's entirely possible, but I just think it's more about Mike White taking the job for himself. And somewhere along the line, it feels like the Jets locker room really started to believe in Mike White. And, you know, that's not that uncommon because they see these guys every day. I always equate this stuff to the experiences you and I can relate to. As much as the NFL is this big mystical thing, in a lot of ways it's just like a regular workplace. And, if you work in an office, the people who are good at your job, the people who are bad at your job. And, you get a sense of who should be promoted and who should not be promoted. And I think what's happened in the locker room is the Jets, the guys saw that, and that's one of the reasons Mike White has the support in the locker room is they saw Mike White every day in practice, and they realized, this guy should be promoted. And I think sometimes it's as simple as that. Sometimes the NFL is as simple as, a comparable situation that you or I might be in our day-to-day lives. So I think Mike White, earned the job. I think he earned the opportunity to be the first guy up in the event Zach Wilson struggled, and, that's where the Jets went to. Next question. Does it seem like everybody wants the Jets to be a ground and pound team similar to the 49ers? The thing is, Mike LaFleur. I like him, but it seems like he's too pass heavy and loves running empty sets in short yardage. Do you see a conflict in philosophy? Well, the empty set on 4th and goal with the game on the line, that's one I disagree with because I think you have to have the threat of the run in there. Now, it's one thing if you have a mobile quarterback. In that situation, it actually does make sense to have an empty set because you send 5 guys out, you're pretty much limiting the number of defenders who can be in the box because at least one player has to go out with every receiver. So if you have a guy who can run the ball, especially a power runner, somebody who can lower his shoulder and get a tough yard or two, then it does make sense to go empty because the threat of the run's still there and you're lightening the box because you're with an empty set, the box is as light as it can be. The problem is Mike White's not very mobile. Now, in that sequence, he actually did have a 4-yard, or I take it back. It was actually the previous series. But Mike White did have a 4-yard scramble where he almost scored. But, he's not a guy who's really going to do a whole lot for you with his mobility. So I think in that situation, that's where, maybe Mike LaFleur got a little cute. Even if you're going to throw the ball, I still think you'll want to leave the threat of the run on the table so the defense at least has to account for it. It also goes into, how the pass rushers attack it because if there's no threat of the run, they can just fire upfield. They don't need to hesitate a little bit to play the run assignments. I think that Mike LaFleur might be getting a little too much criticism, though, for the Jets' overall passing numbers. I know they threw a lot on Sunday, but they had to. They were behind in the game. At one point they were down 17. And this goes back to what happened when Flacco was playing quarterback for the Jets. There was all this talk about why are the Jets throwing the ball so much? When those 3 games Flacco started, they were behind in all 3 of them. And even the game they won against Cleveland, they were down 2 scores with 2 minutes left. So you don't really have a choice in that situation. I think the Jets would like to run the ball. Now, part of the problem is that Breece Hall's out. Now, those games where Breece Hall was really coming to his own, you could see the run-pass splits were skewing heavily towards the run game. That's because the Jets had a back who could run it. And as much as I love Michael Carter, and as much as I praise the James Robinson trade when it happens, those guys have been inconsistent this year. Michael Carter's had some good games, but he's also had some games where he hasn't been so good. And James Robinson, really hasn't delivered at this point. He was inactive a week ago. He was vocally unhappy about it. Well, he came back this week in Minnesota and really didn't do a whole lot with it. So you also have to be able to run the ball effectively. Now, the addition of Bam Knight, that's a game changer. That might allow the Jets to get back to the run game. But they also, can't fall behind in these games again. The defense needs to get back to doing its job. I've been saying this the last couple of days. I think the defense is getting off too easy for what happened Sunday. Gave up 20 in the first half, 27 for the game. That's not the Jets defense we know. That's not the Jets defense we need. We need this defense to be a driving force in these victories. And when the Jets win, it's got to be because of the defense. Yeah, the offense has to do its job too. Can't have bad offense, but Jets defense, I think they need to do better. I just think that you need a better performance from the defense going forward. And if you do that, if you don't fall behind in these games, by 2-3 scores, then you can run the ball a little bit more. But if you get into a tough spot when you're chasing the game, you got to throw the ball. It's not what the Jets want to do. I think with Mike White, maybe they can do it a little bit better than they've done with Zach Wilson or Joe Flacco. But I think it's game situation. I don't think it's so much Mike LaFleur. Now, as we continue on this Wednesday mailbag edition of the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll touch on the topic everybody's angry with Mike LaFleur over, and that's red zone play calling. That's as we continue this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Turo. Turo is the world's largest car-sharing marketplace, and with Turo, you can book any car you want wherever you want it from a community of local hosts. You can browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the US, Canada, UK, and Australia. You can book a spacious SUV or minivan for a family road trip. You can get a classic or luxury car for a special event, birthday, or holiday. Find affordable economy cars if you're on a budget and just need to get from A to B. Test drive that new electric vehicle you've had your eye on to see how it fits into your everyday life. Many Turo hosts can deliver the car right to you. And if you're heading to Buffalo this weekend and you need a car, check out Turo. Every trip is backed by a liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Forget boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo, Turo.com. Thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. This podcast is free and it's available on all platforms, including YouTube. We continue with our weekly mailbag. Our next question, John. The Jets currently ranked 26th in red zone touchdowns. I thought the Jets left a lot of points on the board Sunday and really all year. I also don't think the Jets are making a good effort to get Garrett Wilson the ball in the red zone. What are some things the Jets can do differently to increase scoring? Well, I have an answer that I don't think people are going to like. I don't know that there's anything necessarily the Jets are doing wrong in the red zone. Now, I think the play calling Mike LaFleur had on Sunday was not great because the red zone is a very constricted area of the field. You got a lot of bodies there because there's just not much field left, which means easier to rally and make tackles on defense. That's why a lot of bend but don't break defenses succeed, because you can give up yards between the 20s, but once you get into the 20, the space is much more constricted, much tougher to complete passes, much tougher to run. I think Mike LaFleur called too many plays that were long developing in the red zone, so that's one issue I've got with him. The other issue is just the going empty on the 4th and goal play from the 1. Jets actually on that play drew it up pretty well. They got Braxton Berrios open. It's just, Mike LaFleur threw the ball a little behind him, and Berrios couldn't come up with it. Blame goes to both guys on that. I think Berrios should have had it. But if you look at the data, what it tells you is that red zone performance year to year in the NFL is really not consistent. As much as anything, it's really based on luck, whereas performance between the 20s is very consistent year to year. So I think the issue with the Jets is just more they haven't been good on offense, period. I don't think this has been a good enough offense this year. And, a lot of that goes back to the inconsistency they've gotten at the quarterback position. So what can they do? Well, they made the change at quarterback, so hopefully you get a little bit more out of the offense going forward in the red zone. But there's just a lot of variance. There's a lot of bad luck in the red zone. Yeah, I think LaFleur, that for one game, that play calling was not any good. But you remember, if you've been a Jets fan long enough, you may remember Mark Sanchez's third year. The Jets had this amazing red zone offense. Sanchez was responsible for 32 touchdowns. I think he had 26 passing touchdowns, 6 rushing touchdowns. And people thought that this was a big thing, even though Sanchez's efficiency everywhere else was terrible. And the next year, what happened? Well, his efficiency didn't get better. It's just the red zone play matched what he was doing on the rest of the field. So I don't know that red zone performance really is that significant. I think that as much as anything, it's just been a product of the Jets' offense not being that good anywhere on the field. And hopefully, with the new pieces they got on offense, that begins to change a little bit. Next question. Jets lost to the Vikings because Mike LaFleur does not have a red zone package that reliably works. Here's my idea. Put Strevler in at quarterback and Quinnen Williams as a blocking back and run behind an overloaded line with 2 tight ends to one side and work on a jump pass option to the tight end skipping out for good measure. What do you think? I mean, I wouldn't put Quinnen Williams in on offense. That's one thing I would not do. I know everybody wants the Strevler package, and I guess if he can do it, it's not a bad idea. To be honest with you, I think when you talk about Wildcat, people say it's outdated, but really it's just power football. I do think teams should go to the Wildcat more frequently in power situations. I think that's really the scenario where the Wildcat makes sense, because it's really just classic smash mouth football. So you want to put Strevler in for those situations if he can handle it. I don't think it's a problem, but I don't know that Strevler is the red zone beast. I think the issue is that, going back to the play calling, if you want to get on Mike LaFleur for something, 3 cracks from the 1-yard line on Sunday, Bam Knight gets the ball once. Bam Knight was, looked like a good inside runner. We talked in the first segment about how Jets haven't really run the ball effectively. Well, now they got a guy who actually may be able to help them lean back into that run game they had going with Breece Hall in Bam Knight. I don't think Bam Knight's going to be as good as Breece Hall, but maybe they found a little something there with him. So I think, yeah, you can have a Strevler package, but more significantly, Give the ball to Bam Knight when you're on the goal line. Next question. Like many of our other questioners, I think a change in red zone philosophy is needed and wonder why Mims is not used in red zone packages. He's 6'4" and creates mismatches against most corners. I think that's a fair comment. I think especially from how little you're getting out of Elijah Moore, put Mims in red zone situations. Elijah Moore's little. He's not going to help you that much in red zone situations. Again, it's an easy spot to rally the ball and tackle. I do think that's a personnel move that you can justify. I don't think any of these things are silver bullets. I don't think any of these things is going to, magically fix the Jets' offense in the red zone. They just got to play better. So much of this gets pointed at coaching, but really most of it is about execution. Any play call looks good when your players execute it. Any play call looks stupid when your players can't execute it. But yeah, I think getting Denzel Mims into the lineup, there's some logic to that. That does make some sense to me. So I think especially when you're talking about Elijah Moore, his size and how little he's really providing you at this point, that's a change that really seems pretty logical to me. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we will close out our weekly mailbag show. We'll talk about the pass interference penalty. Seems like it's down across the league. What's going on there? That and more as we close out this Wednesday mailbag edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by BetOnline. The Jets are close to being double-digit underdogs in Buffalo this weekend. If you want to lay some money down because you believe in the Jets, you should know that BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get all the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From football to basketball to soccer and esports, they've got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts like this one, you can find those at BetOnline as well. They are the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on our Wednesday mailbag show. Our next question comes from Cameron. Cameron writes, John, I know you're a tortured Jets fan like the rest of us, but did I really hear you say that it would be better to be blown out than to lose a close game? I cannot believe my ears right now. In my opinion, that was about as good of a loss as you could get. The team showed fight against one of the best teams in the league and proved they are not a stepping stone in the schedule anymore. It also settled who will be the quarterback for the rest of the season, in my opinion. Well, I did say that. I think it's more painful to lose a close game than it is to get blown out. You get blown out, then you kind of resign yourself at some early point in the game. Whereas the game the Jets lost, it was the most agonizing way you could lose because every time you were about to quit, they made you believe again. So from that standpoint, yes, I'd rather get blown out. And I mean, it could take you through the Gase and Bowles eras where the Jets played good teams tight. I mean, I think you got to win. You got to win. If you lose, you lose. I'm not a big believer in moral victories in games that you lose in the NFL. And I think we're past the point where there are moral victories for the Jets. So yes, I did say that. Cameron's next question is, how do you see the quarterback situation shaking out next year if you were to make a guess? Chris Sims on this podcast said he could see Zach asking out if he's not put back in this year, and I could totally see that happening. White has been a great filler in so far, but he has ways to go to prove himself to be a franchise quarterback. I don't see how Zach Wilson asks out. It's kind of like the Elijah Moore situation. What have you done that you can really demand a trade? Do you think anybody's going to start Zach Wilson right now? I don't think anybody's going to. I don't think there's going to be a great market to. There might be a market to trade for Zach Wilson, but who's going to just hand him the starting job based on what he's done in the NFL? I mean, Chris Sims has always been a big Zach Wilson guy, and it's nice to have a member of the media who likes the quarterback on your team. But Zach Wilson's in no position to be making demands of the Jets right now, so I think he'll be back next year. If I was to guess, I think White's going to be back, and I think maybe it'll be a Mike White, Zach Wilson kind of competition. Jets will certainly bring in a veteran with experience, and looking at the way things are shaping up, I mean, I don't know. Listen, it depends. If Mike White goes out there and plays terribly for 5 weeks, this will change. But at this point in time, I mean, there aren't a lot of players who are going to be available who are clearly better than Mike White. Now, that could change. There might be a guy who shakes loose who we're not expecting to shake loose, but any good quarterback is usually under contract. They usually don't hit the open market, so it kind of limits who's available. My guess is Mike White's probably going to remain a member of the Jets. Our next question John, I know you're a big believer in having as many lottery tickets as possible at quarterback. Should the Jets be interested in Baker Mayfield? Well, Mayfield was claimed by the Rams on Tuesday, so that's off the table. Yes, I am a big believer in having as many quarterbacks in the mix as possible, but I think this one would have been tough because, it comes with all that baggage, and you got a good thing in the locker room right now. I don't know that you want to bring, of the pitfalls you got in the locker room, I don't know that you want to bring Baker Mayfield in to hang around Zach Wilson with where Zach Wilson is right now. So I do think you have some chemistry things. In the offseason, I thought it was worth it for Carolina to make that move because they really didn't give up anything. So, even though it didn't work out for Carolina, what did they really lose? Pretty much nothing. But I did think at this point in time, you go with what you got because I think you're running some risks with what happens in the locker room if you go down that path. And our last question, John, I've watched the NFL a lot this year and definitely noticed less pass interference and defensive holding calls than in previous years. Has there been a change in the rules, or have officials been directed to throw less flags? What do you think is the best way for the league to handle pass interference? In the wake of gambling, it has to have the league concerned. I actually looked this up because I had no idea what the answer was, and it is true. Pass interference penalties are down. There are around 0.84 per game this year, and in 2021 and 2020, there was over 1 per game. So you've seen it drop by about 0.2, 0.3 flags per game on pass interference. So that's a great catch. I was not aware of this. Usually the way the NFL works, if there's something that goes out, if there's a league mandate, it's usually to throw more flags because the league wants more offense. I think the league has decided that more offense is better TV ratings because the NFL is so driven by quarterbacks, and things have been going that way for a long time. So there have been years where they've laid it out to officials that you need to throw more flags. That it happened in, I think it was 2005, or no, it's 2004, I think it happened, and then 2013 it happened. So you see it every 10 years. We're probably due for another one of those. But I don't think the league's ever going to ask them to throw less flags. Now, you don't want it to get to a ridiculous point, but what usually happens when the league asks the officials to throw more flags is the preseason's a disaster because they're just flag fest because the officials are trying to condition the players. Everybody loses their minds. Everybody acts like it's the end of the world. There are some really bad flags that get tweeted about on social media nonstop. They say, how is this going to be a flag? Football's over. And then what happens is the games start. The officials find a better balance, and the players adjust. The players aren't going to commit flat. Their players aren't going to do things on the field that they know are going to draw flags. So players eventually adjust. They figure it out, and it all works out. But I don't think they're doing it on purpose. And I worry a little bit that this might be a sign that we'll get a memo next year that we need to throw more flags because we need more offense. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you're listening on a podcast source, please give the show a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. These things help the channel out and help other Jets fans find the podcast. Have a great Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.